During the execution of the program, it's very difficult to handle the errors. I want normal flow of execution. For that reason, I'm going to have exception handling in Java. Suppose if I want to throw my own exception, that time I'm going to use throw keyword. These kinds of errors are not handled by the catch block, because here I have written only null point exception. Hello to all, a warm welcome to my new session on Unit 3, and the chapter name here is Exception Handling. I am Revati from the Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, First Grade College, Temple of Excellence, Mysuru. So dear student, in my last session of this unit, I have completed multi-threading, thread in Java and runnable interface. That means in that session, I have discussed what is multi-threading in Java and what are the life cycle of a thread. Along with that, how to create thread and how to use thread. Along with that, I have discussed extending thread class and implementing runnable interface. These are the topic I have completed in my last session of this unit, and from the examination point of view, these topics are very important. So dear student, please concentrate more on this topic. Now in my today's session, I'm going to deal with exception handling in Java and exception keyword, that is what is try and catch, what is try, and finally what are the different kinds of exception scenarios, along with that multiple catch block, along with that final block. And dear student, please remember one thing here, that it is better to concentrate this unit, because under this unit we are going to get only three topics. One is package, another one multi-threading, and another one exception handling. And if you study these three topics properly, then you can very easily score 20 marks. And from the examination point of view, this is also very important topic. You can able to get the questions like what is an exception, what are the methods or what are the keywords used to handle an exception, etc. Now at the beginning, I'm going to have the topic, that is exception handling in Java. So what is this exception? So here exceptions are nothing but the error handling. During the execution of the program, there may be a chance of an occurring of error. Okay, now when the errors are occurred, it's going to change the flow of the execution. That means it's going to change the execution flow. Now it's very difficult to handle an exception, but in Java provides special mechanism called exception handling. Now the exception handling in Java is one of the powerful mechanism to handle runtime error. So during the execution of the program, it is very difficult to handle the errors. To handle errors in Java, we are going to have runtime exception, so that the normal flow of the application can be maintained. That means if there is any error that occurred during the execution of the program, then it's going to change the flow of program. That is, it's going to change the execution flow of the program. By using exception handling, we can able to maintain the execution flow of the program. That means the normal flow of the program. Now see here what is exception in Java. So In Java, an exception is an event. So, what is exception? It is an event that is going to disrupt the normal flow of the program. So, here, what is an exception? That is nothing but an event. Okay, when this event is triggered, it's going to change the flow of the execution. Now, I want to manage the execution flow. That means I want normal flow of execution. For that reason, I'm going to have exception handling in Java. So, it is an object. So, it is an object which throws an exception during runtime. So, what is this runtime? That is nothing but the execution time. So, an exception occurs for many different reasons. So, exception may occur for n number of reasons. For example, if I divide any given number by 0, then it is error. That means I'm going to get the exceptions like divide by 0. So, here exception may occur for any reason. Following are the some of the scenarios. So, there are some of the examples for an exception. So, a user has entered an invalid data. For example, okay, someone requested some data, but user entered some other data. So, it is invalid data. This is also example for an event or an exception. Now, a file that need to be opened but cannot be found. Think that I want to open certain file. Whatever the file I want to open that is not present, then once again this is the example for an exception. Now, a network communication has been lost in the middle of the communication. Okay, that means during the transferring of file from one system to another system, there may be a connection lost. Okay, then this is also example for exception handling. In that time, the Java virtual machine has run out of memory. So, the Java virtual machine has run out of memory. Now, these are the certain exception keywords I'm going to use in Java. So, here I'm going to use try, catch, finally, throw, and throws. Okay, fine. So, what is the need of try? So, I'm going to write try and which are the code I want to execute. That one I'm going to write in the try block. Now, the try keyword is used to specify a block where we should place a exception code. That means which exception code? Okay, that's nothing but I'm going to write the code between try block, or I'm going to write the code within the try block. Now, it means we cannot use try block alone. Okay, that means if the try block generates any error, that must be handled. For that reason, we cannot write try block alone. So here I want to write catch block. That means I'm going to have the try block followed by the catch block. So the try block must be followed by either catch block or finally. Now, if I consider my next keyword, that is catch. A catch block is used to handle the exception. It must be preceded by the try block. So, at the beginning, I'm going to have the try block. Below that, I'm going to write the catch block, and it is mainly used to catch the exception. So, it can be followed by a finally block later. That means I can able to have try block. After that, I can able to have catch block. After that, I can able to have finally block. Now, What is this finally keyword? So finally keyword block is used to execute the necessary code. That means in the final block, I'm going to write the necessary code and that must be executed. For example, if I want to close all the connections, that is network connections, or if I want to close file descriptor, those things are written in the finally block. So the finally block is used to execute the necessary code of the program. It is executed whether an exception is handled or not. That means when try block throws an exception and that exception is handled or not, that is secondary, but the finally block must execute. Okay, so in the finally blocks, I'm going to perform all the closing connections. Now I'm going to have my next keyword, that is throw. So a throw keyword is used to throw an exception. Suppose if I want to throw my own exception, in that time I'm going to use throw keyword. And what is the need of throws? So here the throws keyword is used to declare exception. Okay, suppose I want to declare my own exception. In that situation, I'm going to use throws keyword, and it specifies that there may occur an exception in the method. It does not throw an exception. So to declare my own exception, I'm going to use throws keyword. So dear student, from the examination point of view, the keywords comes under exception handling is very, very important. And what are the keywords? I'm going to have try, catch, finally, then throw and throws. Now at the beginning, I'm going to have try and catch block. So what is this try? It's a keyword. That means I'm going to try. What I'm going to try? That means I'm going to write the block of code in my try block. And I'm trying to execute. During the execution, if there is any error occurred, that must be handled by the catch block. For that reason, try block must be followed by the catch block. Now, the try statement allows you to define a block of code that to be tested for errors while it is being executed. So, in my try block, I'm going to write the codes which I want to execute. The catch statement allows you to define a block of code to be executed. So here the catch block, it allows the user to define a block of code that must be executed if an error occurs in the try block. Okay, think that if there is an error, okay, that's going to occur in try block. Now, who is responsible for handling that error? That is none other than catch block. Now, all the errors are handled successfully by the catch block. So, here the try and catch keywords come in pair. So, first I want to use the try. After that, I want to use the catch block. Now, see here, I'm going to use the keyword try and I'm going to have the block of statement and I'm going to place that block of statement within the curly brace. After that, I'm going to have the catch keyword. See, I'm going to have the exception and I'm going to have the exception object. Okay, and I'm going to write the block of statement within the curly brace. Okay, this is the way I can able to use try as well as catch block. Now moving further, I'm going to have the try block and which is followed by finally. Now the Java try block must be followed by either catch block or finally. That means when I use try block in my program, that must be followed by catch block or finally. Now this is the example as well as syntax. Okay, now I'm going to have the try keyword and I'm going to write the code which I want to execute. Okay, and if I want to close any connections or if I want to perform any cleanup operations, that should be written in the finally block. Okay, so here try block followed by the finally block. Now exception handling. So I'm going to have the example. How can I handle exception? So this is the simple program I'm going to have. Okay, fine. So what is my class name here? Java exception handling. Inside that I'm going to have the main program and I'm going to write the code which one I want to execute. So I'm going to write the code inside the try block and I want to execute this code. And during the execution of this code, if this code generates any error, okay, that must be handled by the catch block and it's going to generate arithmetic exception. So I'm going to have the object E and I'm going to display the exception message. Okay, now I'm going to display, that is I'm going to print the rest of the code. Okay, now see here, if I divide any number by 0, I'm going to get the error message because I cannot able to divide any number by 0. So this is the example for arithmetic exception and this can be handled by the catch block. This is the way I can able to make use of try and catch block in my program. Now these are the some of the common exception scenarios. Okay, these are the some of the example for an exception. For example, if I consider any number and if I try to divide that number by 0, I'm going to get the error message. That is nothing but arithmetic exception. Okay, now null pointer exception. If we have a null value in any variable, for example, see here, I'm going to use the variable and I'm going to assign the value null. And if I try to get the length of that variable, then it leads an error. Okay, now what kind of error? That is null pointer exception. So if we have a null value in any variable, performing any option on the variable throws a null pointer exception. So here I'm going to assign the value null and I'm trying to get the length of the variable. In that time, it generates an event or an exception. And what kind of exception? That is null pointer exception. Then I'm going to have array index out of bound. So what is this array index out of bound? I'm going to have some array range. Okay, from that I can able to get the position or element, and if I try out of that range, then it generates array index out of bound exception. Fine. Now see this example. Okay, I'm going to create an array and what is the size of the array? It is 5. But here I'm trying to access 10th element. In that time, it generates an error. So that kind of errors are called array index out of bound exception. So when an array exceeds to its size, the array index out of bound exception occurs. So here, if I consider this example, the size of the array is 5, but here I'm trying to access or get 10th element, then this generates an error. Okay, and what kind of error? It is array index out of bound exception, followed by I'm going to have Java multiple catch block. That means For one try block, I can able to have n number of catch block. So this is the syntax. So I'm going to have the try block, one try block, and it is followed by first catch block and second catch block. So a try block can be followed by one or more catch block, and each catch block must capable to handle different kinds of errors or exception. Okay, so this is the syntax for try and multiple catch block. So I'm going to have only one try block and I'm going to have two catch block. Now let me to write the simple example here. So it is my class name, that is nothing but multiple catch block. Okay, here I'm going to write the code, that is inside the try block I'm going to write the code. Okay, fine. Then I try to print 10th element, but here I'm going to create an array of size 5. But here I'm trying to access 10th element. So it is going to generate an exception. Now to handle this exception, I'm going to write the code. Okay, where I'm going to write the code in my catch block. So what is my first type of exception? That is arithmetic exception. So I'm going to write my first kind of exception in catch block, and in the next catch block I'm going to write another kind of exception, that is array index out of bound exception. Okay, and in my next block once again I'm going to write exception E. Okay, now at the end I'm going to close my try block. So this is the example for single try block followed by 3 catch block, or it's nothing but the multiple catch block. Now I'm going to have the finally block. So a finally block is a block used to execute important code as well as closing the connection. So here try blocks are used to execute important code as well as it's mainly used to close all the connections. So Java finally block is always executed whether an exception is handled or not. So dear student, when I use finally in my Java program, it must be executed even though exception is generated or not. Therefore, it contains all the necessary statements that need to be printed regardless of the execution or exception occurs or not. So, I'm going to write all the necessary statements in my finally block even though exception is occurred or not. So, the finally block must be followed by the try block. Okay, so I can able to have try catch finally, or I can able to have try and catch block, or I can able to have try and finally block. Okay, now the use of finally block. So here finally block is mainly used to close all the connections as well as it is mainly used to perform cleanup procedure. Okay, there are certain time we have to perform some cleanup procedure as well as we want to close the connections as well as we have to close the file descriptor connection. Okay, in that time I can able to make use of finally block. So the important statement to be printed can be placed in the final block. That means there are certain statement and I feel that that is important and I want to print that, and where I am going to place that statement, that is in my finally block. So dear student, let's see the example for this topic, that is how I can able to make use of finally block in my program. So I'm going to have the class called test finally block, and I'm going to write the main program, and whatever the statement I want to execute, that should be written in my try block. So here I have written, okay, inside the try block, and I'm going to perform 25 divided by 0 arithmetic operation, and I'm going to print the data. Now this 25 divided by 0 is going to generate an error. And what kind of error? It is arithmetic error. But if I consider my program here, I don't have any arithmetic exception. And these kinds of errors are not handled by the catch block, because here I have written only null point exception. But what is my exception type? It is arithmetic exception. But here I did not return, or I did not added catch block for arithmetic exception. Now I want to handle this exception, and who is going to handle this exception? That is none other than finally. So the system.out.println, the finally block is always going to execute it. That means when an error is generated and this is handled by the finally block, and I'm going to get the output like finally block is always executed. Along with that, I'm going to get the output. Rest of the codes are executed. This is the way I can able to make use of finally block in my Java program. So dear student, in my today's session I started with what is an exception handling in Java and what are the different keywords supported by Java. Along with that, how to make use of try block, how to make use of catch block, how can I make use of multiple catch block in my program. Along with that, how can I make use of finally blocks in my program. And all these topics are very, very important from the examination point of view. Along with that, in my next session, I'm going to deal with applets programming, along with that graphics programming, as well as I'm going to deal with input and output. So dear student, in my today's session you got more information about exception handling in Java. Let's meet in the next session with some more information about applets programming. Until that, keep watching and keep learning. Thank you.